They thought she was just another woman walking her dog on a quiet trail outside Muskoka. That was their first mistake. It wouldn't be their last. The morning had started the way Veronika Strand liked them. Cold and unhurried, a thin October frost still clung to the pine needles along the Skeleton Lake trailhead, and the sky above was the particular shade of grey that northern Ontario wears like a coat in autumn. She had parked her truck at the far end of the lot, away from the two other vehicles, the way she always did. Old habit. Situational awareness didn't shut off because you were on leave. Kodiak walked beside her without a leash. He never needed one. The Belgian Malinois moved through the world like water around stone, fluid, deliberate, aware of everything. He was 4 years old, tawny and black across the saddle, with a long scar that ran from his left shoulder to his ribs, where a piece of pipe had opened him up 18 months ago in a situation Veronika was still not permitted to talk about. He'd been cleared for service again 6 weeks later. She'd needed considerably longer. She had requested the leave herself, which her commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Darcy Brennan, had called the first sensible thing she'd done in 3 years. He wasn't wrong. After 2 rotations overseas, a CSOR deployment that had run 4 months past its original scope, and a debriefing process that had lasted longer than some of her actual assignments, Veronika had needed something without a threat matrix. She'd chosen Muskoka because she'd grown up nearby, in a small town called Bracebridge, and because no one there would recognize what her posture meant, or why her eyes moved the way they did when she walked into a room. Kodiak paused at the edge of the tree line and looked back at her. "Go ahead," she said quietly. He moved into the pines. She followed him down the trail, hands loose at her sides, listening to the way the forest sounded around them. A nuthatch somewhere above, wind in the upper canopy, the soft percussion of her boots on packed earth. She breathed in slowly, counting the exhale the way her instructor at Dwyer Hill had taught her years ago, back when she was still learning the difference between tension that kept you alive and tension that would quietly ruin you. She'd been working on that distinction ever since. They were about 40 minutes out from the trailhead when Kodiak stopped. He didn't growl, he didn't bark, he simply went still, the particular stillness of a working dog that has registered something the human brain hasn't caught up to yet. His ears pivoted forward. His weight shifted almost imperceptibly to his front legs. Veronika's hand dropped to her side. 3 men were standing where the trail bent around a granite outcropping. They hadn't been there when she'd passed this section an hour earlier. She would have noticed the truck. A black Ram 1500 with Alberta plates, parked half on the shoulder of the access road that crossed the trail near the rock face. 2 of them were leaning against it. A third was crouched at the waterline of a shallow creek that cut across the path, washing his hands. They weren't hikers. The gear was wrong. They wore work boots, not trail shoes, dark canvas jackets with the collars turned up. The man by the creek had a duffel bag sitting on the rocks beside him, dark green and heavy from the way it sat. The man closest to the truck had his hands in his jacket pockets and was tracking her with his eyes before she'd even fully rounded the corner. People who were genuinely just stopping along a forest access road didn't look at strangers the way that man was looking at her. She kept walking, measured pace, eyes forward but peripheral vision wide. Kodiak had moved half a step ahead of her, placing himself between her and the men without being told. "Hey?" The voice came from the one by the truck, late 30s, heavy through the shoulders beard that needed 2 more weeks of commitment. Trails closed up ahead. Veronika stopped, not because she believed him. There had been no signage, no barrier, nothing at the trailhead to indicate any closure, but because she wanted to hear what else he would say. "Maintenance crew," he added. "They're doing work on the boardwalk section past the creek." She looked at the creek. She looked at the duffel bag. She looked at the man who had stopped washing his hands and was now simply standing there, watching. "I didn't see any signs at the trailhead," she said. Her voice was even, conversational. They probably fell down. He shrugged. Weather's been bad. She almost smiled. The weather had been clear for 6 days. I'll just go take a look, she said, and started walking again. Lady. His voice shifted. Something dropped out of it. I said the trail's closed. Kodiak's head turned toward the man. His lips didn't move, but the stillness in him changed quality, tightened the way a cable tightens before it snaps. Veronika kept her breathing steady. She was calculating, the way she always calculated. Distance, angle, the position of each man's hands, the weight distribution in their stance, the duffel bag and what it likely contained, the access road and whether the truck's engine was warm. It was, she noticed. She could see a faint distortion of heat above the hood. I appreciate the heads up, she said, but I'll make my own call. The second man, shorter, dark-haired, a jagged scar across his chin that hadn't been stitched properly. He moved toward the trail, putting himself between her and the path ahead. He didn't do it like a person redirecting a stranger. He did it like a man who was used to using his body as a boundary. Your dog goes first, he said. He looked at Kodiak the way some people did, not with fear, but with the cold calculation of someone who had hurt animals before, and considered it a practical skill. Cut him loose, and he wanders into the bush. You come with us for a few minutes, ask some questions, and then everybody goes home. Veronika looked at him for a long moment. I'm going to need you to step back, she said. Both of you. The man with the scar laughed. It wasn't a warm sound. He turned to the third man who had finally straightened up from the creek and was moving to flank wide around the left. She's asking us to step back. I heard her. The scarred man looked back at Veronika. Here's what's going to happen, sweetheart. Don't. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The single syllable landed between them like something solid. Whatever you're about to say, don't. He blinked, just slightly. The word had landed somewhere he hadn't expected it to land. I'm going to give you this once, she said. Walk back to your truck. Drive north. Leave the bag. Something shifted in the heavy-shouldered man's face. She had said leave the bag, and he hadn't expected her to know about the bag. That told her something. Who are you? He asked. She looked at the duffel. She looked at the truck. She looked at the 3 men in the order that mattered most. The last warning you're going to get, she said. Now walk away. The scarred man moved first. He came at her from the left, low and fast. The kind of move that worked on people who froze. She didn't freeze. She had been trained at CSOR's composite course, pushed through a combatives program that had been designed by people who understood that hesitation was a choice and a very poor one. She stepped inside his reach before his hands could find her, dropped her weight, drove her elbow into the hinge of his jaw, with the compact precision of a woman who had done this enough times that it had become mechanical. He folded. The third man from the creek came in a half-second later. She heard him rather than sought him, the crunch of gravel, the change in air, and she pivoted, caught his outstretched arm at the wrist and elbow, turned with it, and redirected his momentum into the granite outcropping. The impact was loud. He made a sound she recognized and dropped. The heavy-set man, the one who had spoken first, who clearly considered himself the architect of whatever was happening here, had started toward her and then stopped. He had stopped because Kodiak was in front of him. The Malinois hadn't barked. He was simply there, 4 feet away, weight forward, mouth slightly open, staring up at the man with an absolute and terrible focus. There was no performance in it, no aggression theater, just 4 years of rigorous training and 11 months of genuine combat deployment, expressing themselves through the body of an animal who understood down to the cellular level what his job was. The man looked at Kodiak. He looked at his 2 colleagues on the ground. He looked at Veronika, who was standing with her hands at her sides, breathing normally, watching him with an expression that was less anger than information. Kodiak, higher. The dog backed to her heel without looking away from the man. The bag, Veronika said. Step away from the bag. He did. His hands came up slowly, palms out. a practiced gesture, the gesture of a man who'd been on the wrong end of this kind of moment before. "Who are you?" he asked again. "Call 911, she said. "Tell them you need police assistance at the Skeleton Lake Access Road south of Torrance. Tell them it's a matter of public safety." She paused. "They already know it is. They've been looking for that bag for 8 days. The color left his face. Not all at once. It receded the way light does at the edge of winter, gradually and then completely. Veronika crouched beside the duffel bag. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She could see the corner of a weatherproof case through the gap in the zipper, the kind used for sensitive equipment transport, and she recognized the type. She had been briefed on what was in it 3 days ago, when an RCMP tactical liaison had sat across a table from her in a Tim Hortons on the highway outside Gravenhurst and explained, in the politely indirect language of interagency protocol, that there was a situation developing in her general vicinity and that it might be advisable for her to stay alert. She had been on leave. She had told him she would think about it. Then she had gone back to her truck and figured out where they would move the package and when. She hadn't told Kodiak any of this, of course. He didn't need operational briefings. He needed her to point the direction. She called it in herself, on a number that wasn't 911. 4 minutes later, she could hear the helicopters, 2 of them, coming in low from the northeast. The heavyset man sat down on the running board of his truck, not because she told him to, because his legs had made a unilateral decision. The scarred man was still on the ground, holding his jaw, watching Veronika with the expression of someone recalculating an entire worldview. "You're not just a hiker," he said. His voice was thick. "No," she said. "What are you?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Kodiak, who was sitting beside her, tail still, ears still forward, watching the tree line with the patient attention of an animal who knew the work wasn't quite finished yet. "I'm taking my dog for a walk," she said. The tactical team came in fast and clean, 6 operators from the RCMP's emergency response team, moving through the tree line from the north and the access road from the south, professional and unhurried in the way that competence without urgency always looks. Sergeant Paulette Giroux, who was running the tactical end, gave Veronika a long look when she appeared from behind the granite outcropping. "Calloway told us you were in the area," Giroux said. Veronika blinked. Calloway was her CSOR liaison, a quiet man from New Brunswick who communicated primarily through understatement. "He told me I might want to stay alert," she said. Giroux almost smiled. "That's what he calls a full operational briefing." The 3 men were secured and separated. One of the ERT members, young, Veronika's age, with the kind of careful eyes that meant he'd seen a few things, crouched beside the duffel bag and checked the case inside without touching it. He stood and gave Giroux a single nod. "It's intact," he said. Giroux exhaled very slowly. 8 days of work, 3 agencies, a cross-provincial vehicle track, and a bag of stolen signal jamming components intended for a network that was not supposed to exist in Canadian territory. Intact. She turned back to Veronika. "How did you know they'd come through here?" "Terrain," Veronika said simply. "There are 3 access points between here and the lake. 2 of them have cell coverage. This one doesn't." Giroux considered that. "You didn't think to call this in earlier. I wasn't sure it was them until I saw the truck, and once you were sure," Veronika looked at the 3 men being loaded into the back of a tactical vehicle. She looked at the bag. She looked at Kodiak, who was watching the operation with the placid proprietary air of a dog who had done everything he was supposed to do and was now waiting for someone to confirm it. "I had it covered," she said. Giroux looked at the 2 men who had been collected off the ground, and the 3rd who had not moved from the truck's running board since Veronika had looked at him in a certain way. She looked at the Belgian Malinois sitting calmly at Veronika's heel. "Yes," Giroux said. "I can see that." They processed the scene for 3 hours. Veronika sat on a boulder near the creek and drank the thermos coffee she'd brought from the truck. Kodiak lay beside her, his head on her knee, his eyes moving. She scratched behind his ears in the particular place that made him exhale in a long, slow way that sounded almost indistinguishable from contentment. He had a follow-up with the veterinary trauma specialist in Petawawa in 2 weeks. His shoulder was holding. The scar had faded to a dull silver line. Some mornings she caught herself looking at it the same way she suspected people caught themselves looking at her own, not with grief exactly, but with the specific, quiet respect that survivors have for evidence. One of the ERT members came over to take her statement. He introduced himself as Constable Eve Tremaine, young and thorough, with a notebook he used with the earnestness of a man who had not yet learned to distrust analog systems. He asked the questions in order, and she answered them the same way. When he got to the part about the 2 men who had gone down, he paused. "Injuries," he said carefully. "Their injuries appear to be consistent with resisting contact," she said. He looked at her, then at Kodiak, then back at her. He wrote something in his notebook that she couldn't read from her angle. "And your training background," he said, which wasn't quite a question, "is on file," she said. He nodded slowly and wrote that down too. When the statement was done, and Tremaine had retreated back toward the main scene, Sergeant Giroux came to sit beside her on the boulder. Giroux was somewhere in her 40s, built like someone who had stayed in the game past the point where most people quietly stepped aside, with grey at her temples and the blunt pragmatism of a woman who had long since stopped trying to be surprised by anything. "You've been on leave," Giroux said. 3 weeks. How's it going?" Veronika looked at the tree line. The helicopters had gone. The forest had resumed the sounds it had been making before all of this. The nuthatch, the wind, the particular cold silences of October in the Shield country. "Slowly," she said, "but I think that's the point." Giroux nodded. She seemed to understand something about that answer that didn't need elaboration. Calloway will want to try to make this into something. Veronika looked at her. "Try," They sat in silence for a while. Kodiak watched a crow work the far edge of the creek, flipping small rocks with a methodical intelligence that he seemed to find professionally admirable. Eventually Giroux stood, straightened her jacket, and looked back toward the access road where the last of the tactical vehicles was preparing to leave. "We'll have someone bring your truck around," she said. "You don't have to walk back. I'll walk," Veronika said. Giroux looked at her, then at the 4 kilometers of forest trail between them and the parking lot. "Of course you will," she said, not unkindly. After the ERT had cleared out and the access road had gone quiet and the forest had absorbed the last sound of engines fading toward the highway, Veronika stood and picked up her thermos. "Fuss," she said. Kodiak came to heel. They walked back the way they'd come, through the October pines, through the cold and the quiet, through a landscape that had returned so completely to itself that 40 minutes of chaos might never have happened. The frost was gone from the needles now. The light had changed to the particular pale gold of a northern afternoon, the kind that lasts about an hour, before the dark starts coming in from the east. She moved through it, and Kodiak moved with her, and neither of them was in any particular hurry. Somewhere back at Dwyer Hill, Lieutenant Colonel Brennan would eventually receive a phone call from an RCMEP liaison. There would be a conversation. There would be paperwork. There would be a debrief that someone would try to schedule before she was ready for it, and a commendation someone would try to give her that she would politely decline, and the entire apparatus of institutional recognition would swing into motion around something she had done in a forest outside Muskoka on a Tuesday morning in October while ostensibly on rest leave. She would deal with all of that in time. For now the trail was quiet, and the air smelled like pine and cold water, and Kodiak was walking beside her the way he always did, steady and present, a little ahead, watching everything, and 3 men who had made a very poor assessment of a woman walking her dog were being processed somewhere in a tactical vehicle heading south toward Barrie. The crow she'd been watching by the creek appeared again, ahead of them on the path, then lifted away into the canopy as they approached, a brief, dark comma against the pale sky gone before she could properly watch it go. She'd come back to Muskoka because she'd needed something quiet, something without a mission attached, something that was just weather and trees, and the rhythm of walking with a dog who didn't ask her to explain herself. She hadn't entirely gotten that, but she'd gotten this: the trail under her boots, the cold air in her lungs, the specific silence that follows a thing being handled correctly. Kodiak's shoulder moving at her knee, the October light doing what October light does, burning gold and brief before it gives itself over to the dark. That would do. For now, that would do exactly.